We are leaving tomorrow. Dad and I have already sold your beach house, so goodbye. Those were the words my daughter Tiffany spat at me over the phone, her voice dripping with a venomous kind of triumph. I gripped the receiver tight, my knuckles turning white, but my voice remained steady. But you forgot one thing, Tiffany. She paused, and I could hear the smirk in her tone when she asked, "What are you talking about, old man?" I laughed out loud, a dry, raspy sound that echoed in my empty study, because the house she had just sold for millions was actually. But before I tell you how I destroyed the people who tried to bury me alive, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Harrison Caldwell, and for 40 years I built the skyline of Boston. I have poured concrete for skyscrapers and negotiated deals that would make lesser men tremble. But nothing in my career prepared me for the morning. My own flesh and blood decided I was just another asset to be liquidated. It started at 6 in the morning. The sun had barely crested over the horizon, casting long gray shadows across the floor of my master bedroom. I was awake, of course. At 70 years old, sleep is a luxury you stop being able to afford. I was sitting in my leather armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal and enjoying the only hour of peace I get in a day. Then the noise shattered my world. It wasn't a knock. It was a battering ram against the sanctity of my home. The sound of splintering oak echoed through the hallway. That front door was 3 inches of solid mahogany imported from Brazil, the same wood I used to frame the mayor's office back in '95. It was built to withstand hurricanes, not the greed of a desperate daughter. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sudden, sharp rage. I grabbed the heavy brass cane I kept by the nightstand, not because I needed it to walk, but because I liked the weight of it in my hand. "Harrison Caldwell, open up." The voice was unfamiliar, rough, and authoritative. I stepped into the hallway just as 4 strangers in blue scrubs stormed up the stairs. Behind them, like vultures circling a dying animal, came my daughter Tiffany and her husband Brad. Tiffany was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, clutching a piece of paper like a shield. Brad looked like he always did, disheveled in a suit that cost more than he made in a year, smelling of stale scotch and desperation. "Get out of my house," I roared, raising the cane. "I will call the police and have you all arrested for breaking and entering." Brad stepped forward, a smug grin plastered on his face. He held up a hand, and the 4 men in scrubs surrounded me, closing in with practiced efficiency. "Save your breath, Harrison. We are the police, or at least we have the law on our side." Tiffany stepped out from behind him, thrusting the paper toward me. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were cold, hard flint. "It is an emergency guardianship order, Dad. We went to Judge Miller yesterday. We told him about your episodes, how you are forgetting things, how you left the stove on, how you are a danger to yourself." I stared at her in disbelief. My episodes. I had never left a stove on in my life. My mind was as sharp as the steel girders I used to inspect. This was a fabrication, a lie woven from greed. "You are lying, Tiffany," I spat out, backing away as the men moved closer. "I just had a physical last week. Dr. Evans gave me a clean bill of health. This is illegal. This is kidnapping. It is for your own good, Dad," Tiffany said, her voice taking on that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she wanted money. "You are just confused. The doctor said the dementia is progressing rapidly. We are taking you to Sunny Meadows. It is a lovely facility. You will be safe there. Safe." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sunny Meadows was not a facility. It was a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, a place where people were sent to rot while their children spent their inheritance. I swung the cane, but I was 70 years old and recovering from a minor heart procedure. One of the orderlies caught my arm with bruising force, twisting it behind my back until I dropped the brass weapon. Pain shot through my shoulder, but the humiliation burned hotter. "Restrain him," the orderly barked. Brad walked into my bedroom, my sanctuary. He began opening drawers, rifling through my personal effects. I watched helpless as he pulled out the velvet box containing my heart medication. "Hey, be careful with that," I shouted, struggling against the grip of the two men holding me. "That is not generic aspirin, you idiot. That is a specialized beta blocker imported from Switzerland. If you mess up the dosage, you will kill me." Brad tossed the bottle in the air and caught it, laughing. "See Tiffany. He is paranoid. Delusions of grandeur. Thinks his medicine is special. Thinks he is special." He shoved the bottle into his pocket, not caring about the fragility of my condition. Then he turned his attention to the nightstand. There, sitting on a small leather pad, was my watch. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. I had bought it the day I retired a reward for 50 years of blood and sweat. It was worth $200,000, but to me, it was priceless. It was the only thing I had left that reminded me of the time I had earned. Brad picked it up. The gold caught the morning light. "Put that down," I growled, my voice trembling with fury. "That does not belong to you." "It does now," Brad said, slipping the heavy watch onto his own wrist. He held it up, admiring the way it looked on his arm. "Consider it a down payment for all the trouble you are causing us, Harrison. Besides, where you are going, you won't need to know the time. Every day is going to be exactly the same." The orderly pulled a syringe from his kit. I saw the glint of the needle, and panic, cold and primal, flooded my veins. "No," I screamed. "You cannot do this. I have rights. I want my lawyer. Call Benedict Stone." "Dad, stop making a scene." Tiffany sighed, checking her nails as if this were a boring errand she just wanted to finish. "This is exactly why the judge granted the order. You are hysterical." The needle pierced the skin of my arm. I felt the cold burn of the sedative entering my bloodstream. I tried to fight to keep my eyes open to memorize their faces. I wanted to burn the image of their betrayal into my mind so I would never, ever forget. My knees gave out. The men caught me, dragging me toward the door like a sack of cement. As my vision blurred, swimming in a haze of gray fog, the last thing I saw was Brad. He was adjusting the strap of my Patek Philippe, looking at Tiffany, with a grin that promised expensive vacations and fast cars. "We got him, babe," I heard him say, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "The old man is out of the game." I wanted to scream that the game had just begun. I wanted to tell them that they had just made the biggest mistake of their miserable, parasitic lives. But my tongue felt heavy like lead in my mouth. Darkness swallowed the hallway. The last sensation I had was the cold morning air hitting my face as they hauled me out of the home I built into a van that smelled of antiseptic and despair. I blacked out, knowing only one thing. If I woke up, I would make them pay. I would make them pay for every second of this, and they had no idea that the beach house they were so eager to sell was the key to their destruction. They thought they were burying a senile old man. They did not realize they were burying a landmine. Waking up was not a slow drift, but a violent snap back to reality. My head pounded with a rhythm that matched the hum of the engine beneath me. I was not in a bed. I was strapped into a leather seat in the back of a luxury transport van, the kind with tinted windows that separates the wealthy from the world they are trying to ignore. My hands were zip-tied loosely but securely to the armrests. Across from me, crossing his legs and sipping from a bottle of sparkling water, sat Brad. He looked at me with that infuriatingly calm expression, like he was watching a fish flop around on a deck. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of any genuine concern. "Or should I say good afternoon? You have been out for a couple of hours. The sedative works wonders, doesn't it?" My mouth tasted like copper and ash. I struggled against the restraints, testing their strength. "Where is my daughter?" I rasped, my throat dry. "Where is Tiffany?" "She is following us in the Range Rover," Brad replied, gesturing vaguely behind him. "She is crying, of course. You know how emotional she gets when she has to make the tough decisions. But honestly, Harrison, she is relieved. We both are. Dealing with your decline has been exhausting for her. Decline. The word hung in the air, a sterile lie to cover a dirty crime. I stared at him, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of the cabin. I saw it then. Sitting on the small table between us was a keychain. It was silver, tarnished with age, shaped like a soaring seagull. My heart stopped. That was the key to the beach house on Martha's Vineyard. Brad saw my gaze and smiled, picking up the keys and dangling them. Ah, yes. I wanted to tell you the good news personally. We closed the deal this morning while you were napping. $4.5 million, all cash. The buyers were very eager. They planned to tear it down and build something modern. More glass, less wood. You know how it is. You sold it, I whispered, the rage burning through the fog of the drugs. That house was not yours to sell. Catherine and I built that place. Every beam, every window. It was where we scattered her ashes. It is hallowed ground, you parasite. Brad shrugged, a gesture of absolute indifference that made me want to break his neck. Catherine is dead, Harrison. She has been dead for 5 years, and you are legally speaking incapacitated. That gives me and Tiffany power of attorney. We are just liquidating assets to pay for your long-term care, and maybe a little something for our pain and suffering. I glared at him, summoning every ounce of authority I had left from 40 years of dominating boardrooms. You are making a mistake, Brad. A fatal one. My lawyer Benedict Stone has copies of the deed. He knows the trust structures. You cannot just sell a property held in a trust without beneficiary approval. This is fraud. It is grand larceny. You will go to prison for this. Brad laughed, a low chuckle that chilled my blood. He leaned forward, the smell of his expensive cologne mixing with the sterile scent of the van. You still think you are playing by the old rules, Harrison. You think the law is this rigid, unbreakable thing. Let me let you in on a little secret. Judge Miller, the one who signed your guardianship papers, we play golf every Sunday. He owes me a favor for a stock tip that saved his portfolio last year. He does not care about your trust structures. He cares about his handicap and his retirement fund. As far as the state of Massachusetts is concerned, you are just a senile old man, and we are the loving family taking over your burden. The sheer corruption of it, the casual way he admitted to destroying my life, took my breath away. I looked at this man, this parasite I had welcomed into my family. I remembered the day Tiffany brought him home. She was fresh out of her 3rd rehab stint, the one I had paid $100,000 for. She was fragile, broken, trying to piece her life back together after years of heroin addiction. I had stood by her when everyone else, including her own mother before she passed, had wanted to give up. I had cleaned her vomit, paid her dealers off to leave her alone, sat by her bedside through the shakes and the screams. I thought Brad was part of her recovery. I thought he was her savior. Now I realized he was just another addiction, another bad choice she was using to hurt herself and me. Does she know? I asked, my voice quieter, now dangerous. Does Tiffany know you are leveraging her inheritance to pay off your gambling debts? Because I know about the bookies in Atlantic City, Brad. I know about the margins calls. Brad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing. Tiffany does what I tell her to do because she loves me, and because she resents you, Harrison. She resents you for being perfect, for always being the hero while she was the screw-up. It was not hard to convince her that you were losing your mind. She wanted to believe it. It makes her feel less guilty about taking your money. He sat back, checking the Patek Philippe on his wrist, my watch. We are almost there. I looked out the tinted window. The scenery had changed. We were far from the city now, deep in the countryside where the trees grew thick and the houses were miles apart. We turned off the main road onto a gravel driveway that wound through a dense forest. This isn't a hospital, I said, a pit forming in my stomach. No, Brad said, checking his reflection in the window. Hospitals have visiting hours and patient advocates. Sunny Meadows is distinct. It is for people who need absolute privacy, or rather for families who need absolute silence. The van slowed to a crawl. Through the front windshield I saw a gate. It was massive iron bars rising 20 feet into the air, topped with razor wire. But it was not the gate that made my blood run cold. It was the fence stretching out on either side into the woods. It was a double perimeter fence with high-voltage warning signs spaced every 50 feet. There were cameras mounted on poles, swiveling to track our approach. This was not a nursing home. It was a fortress, a prison disguised as a sanctuary. Brad leaned in close, his voice a whisper as the gate groaned open. "Welcome to your new home, Dad. The staff here are very discreet. They don't ask questions. They just make sure the guests stay put. And with the electric perimeter, I don't think you will be taking any midnight strolls." The van rolled through the gates, and they slammed shut behind us with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid closing. I looked at the main building ahead. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion, beautiful on the outside, but the windows were barred. I saw figures in the yard, elderly people shuffling aimlessly, watched by guards who looked more like bouncers than nurses. I realized then that this was not just about money. This was an exile. They were not just stealing my fortune. They were erasing my existence. Brad unbuckled his seatbelt and smirked at me one last time. "Don't worry, we will visit. Maybe once a year, if we have time." As the van doors unlocked, I didn't struggle. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring at the seagull keychain in his hand and made a silent vow to my dead wife. They thought they had trapped me. They thought this fence would keep me in. But they forgot that I was a builder. I knew how foundations were laid, and more importantly, I knew how to tear them down. They had just locked a wolf in a sheep pen, and they had no idea of the carnage that was about to follow. The van doors slid open with a mechanical hiss that sounded like a snake preparing to strike. The sunlight was blinding after hours in the dark tint of the cabin, but I did not have time to adjust. Strong hands grabbed my arms, pulling me out onto the gravel. Brad did not even look back. He just tapped the roof of the van twice, a signal to the driver, and walked toward the waiting Range Rover where my daughter sat. He had discarded me like a bag of trash at the dump, and now the processing began. 2 men in white uniforms flanked me. They were not doctors. They had the thick necks and scarred knuckles of bar bouncers. They marched me up the marble steps of the main building. From the outside, Sunny Meadows looked like a 5-star resort. There were manicured hedges, a fountain spraying crystal-clear water, and the architecture screamed old money. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, the illusion shattered. The air inside did not smell like fresh flowers or ocean breeze. It smelled of industrial antiseptic boiled cabbage, and underneath it all, the faint acrid scent of urine masked by cheap lavender air freshener. A woman stood behind the reception desk. She was tall, with hair pulled back so tight it pulled the skin of her face taut, giving her a permanent look of surprise or disdain. Her name tag read, Nurse Halloway. She looked up at me over rimless glasses, her eyes scanning me up and down like I was a piece of livestock at an auction. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dripping with a fake syrup sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We have been expecting you. Your son-in-law gave us specific instructions. He says you can be quite spirited." I straightened my back, trying to regain some dignity, despite the ache in my joints. "I am not spirited, madam. I am kidnapped. This is a violation of my civil rights, and if you have any sense, you will let me call my attorney before you become an accessory to a felony." Nurse Halloway did not blink. She just smiled, a thin stretching of lips that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, bless your heart. Mr. Sterling warned us about your confusion. He said you often think you are still running a company. Do not worry, sweetie. We are going to take excellent care of you. But first, we need to get you out of those dirty clothes and into something more comfortable." She snapped her fingers, and the 2 gorillas grabbed me. They dragged me down a long corridor past rooms with heavy oak doors that had small reinforced glass windows. I heard sounds coming from them. Some were silent, but others held low moans or the sound of someone weeping softly. They pushed me into a small tiled room that looked uncomfortably like an abattoir. "Strip." One of the men grunted. I stared at him. "I am wearing a $3,000 Italian wool suit. I am not taking it off." They did not ask again. One of them pinned my arms behind my back, while the other roughly tore at my jacket. I felt buttons pop and fabric tear. The sound of my suit ripping was like the sound of my identity being shredded. They stripped me down to my underwear, exposing my aging, scarred body to the cold air and their indifferent stares. I felt a humiliation so deep it burned in my chest. For 50 years, I had commanded respect. I walked into rooms and people stood up. Now I was shivering naked and powerless, while two thugs threw a faded blue hospital gown at me. "Put it on," the guard said, "or we will put it on for you." I pulled the gown over my head. It smelled of bleach and someone else's sweat. It was open at the back, a design meant to strip away the last shred of a man's dignity. They took my shoes, my socks, my belt. They took everything that made me Harrison Caldwell and left me as just another number. Patient 409. "We will keep these for safekeeping," Nurse Holloway said, appearing in the doorway with a clipboard. "You won't be needing street clothes. You are not going anywhere." She led me to my room. It was at the end of the hall. Room 302. She unlocked the door with a heavy magnetic keycard and gestured for me to enter. "Meet your new roommate," she said cheerfully. "This is Mr. Julian Thorpe. He was a CEO too, just like you. I am sure you two will have plenty to talk about." I stepped inside. The room was spacious with two beds separated by a curtain. On the bed by the window sat a man. He must have been my age, maybe younger, but he looked ancient. He was staring out at the electric fence, his mouth slightly open, a thin line of saliva trailing down his chin. He was wearing the same blue gown. "Julian," I said softly. He did not turn. He did not blink. He just rocked back and forth, muttering something unintelligible. I walked closer and recognized him. My God. It was Julian Thorpe. 10 years ago, he ran one of the biggest logistics companies in New England. We had served on a charity board together. He was a shark, a brilliant mind, a man who could recite tax law from memory. Now he was a husk. I looked at his bedside table. There was no family photo, no get-well cards, just a plastic cup of water and a bottle of sedatives. This is what they do, I realized with a jolt of terror that nearly brought me to my knees. This is the end game. They don't just lock you up. They drug you until your mind turns to mush. They turn you into a vegetable so they can drain your accounts without interference. I looked at Julian, and I saw my future. I saw myself sitting in that chair drooling while Brad drove my cars and Tiffany spent my money. Fear is a powerful motivator, but for a man like me, anger is better. I turned away from the ghost of Julian Thorpe and scanned the room. I needed to know my enemy. I needed to know the terrain. The window was reinforced plexiglass, not glass. Unbreakable. The door had no handle on the inside. The air vent was too small to crawl through. Then I saw it. Up in the corner, nestled between the crown molding and the ceiling tiles, was a small black dome. A camera. I walked over to it, pretending to admire the crown molding. The red light blinked once every 5 seconds. It was active. They were watching. Nurse Holloway had lied. This was not a medical facility. Medical facilities monitor heart rates. Prisons monitor behavior. They wanted to make sure I wasn't plotting. They wanted to make sure I wasn't calling for help. They thought they were smart. They thought stripping me of my clothes meant they had stripped me of my resources. But they made one critical mistake. They didn't know who I was before I was a CEO. They didn't know I started as a foreman on construction sites in the 70s, where you learned to hide your valuables in places no thief would look. When the guards had taken my clothes, they had tossed my shoes into a bin by the door, intending to take them to storage later. But the bin was still there. Nurse Holloway had been too eager to show me Julian. I waited. I waited until the heavy magnetic lock clicked shut, sealing us in. I waited until I was sure Nurse Holloway's footsteps had faded down the hall. I walked over to the bin. My shoes were there. My old sturdy leather loafers. I picked up the left shoe. To anyone else, it was just a shoe. But I had these custom-made in Italy with a hollowed-out heel. It was a trick I learned after I was kidnapped for ransom in Brazil in the 80s. Always have a backup. I sat on the bed, turning my back to the camera so my body blocked the view. I twisted the heel of the left shoe. It was stiff, but it gave way. A small compartment slid open. Inside, nestled in foam, was a tiny object. It was not a smartphone. It was a micro GSM phone, no bigger than a car key fob. It had no internet, no camera, just a keypad, and a battery that could last a month. I held it in my hand, feeling the cool plastic against my palm. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held, because it carried the weight of my survival. I slipped it into the waistband of my underwear, the only place I could hide it. I looked up at the camera and smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. They had taken my suit. They had taken my house. They had taken my freedom. But they had left me with the one thing that would destroy them. I looked over at Julian, who was still rocking back and forth. "Don't worry, Julian," I whispered. "We are not going to die in here. I am going to burn this place to the ground, and I am going to start with the people who put us here." I lay back on the bed, clutching the tiny phone against my skin. The war had officially begun, and the first call I was going to make would unleash hell on earth for my ungrateful daughter and her thief of a husband. They wanted a senile old man. They were about to get a general. 1 week inside Sunny Meadows felt like a decade serving a sentence for a crime I did not commit. The days bled into one another, in a gray haze of medication rounds and terrible food. I had established a routine of feigned compliance. I took their pills and hid them under my tongue until I could spit them into the toilet. I shuffled when I walked instead of striding. I let my hands tremble when I held a spoon. To the staff, I was just another fading mind in room 302, but inside my head, I was sharpening my knives. Then on Tuesday morning, the heavy magnetic lock on my door clicked open, not for a nurse, but for a visitor. Tiffany breezed into the room, bringing with her a cloud of expensive perfume that smelled like gardenias and guilt. She was dressed as if she were going to a charity gala rather than visiting her father in a mental institution. She wore a white cashmere coat that I knew cost more than the annual salary of the orderly standing guard at the door. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave for the benefit of Nurse Holloway, who was watching from the hallway with an indulgent smile. "I have missed you so much. Look, I brought your favorite." She set a thermos on the rolling tray table and unscrewed the lid. The smell of chicken noodle soup wafted out, greasy and salty. I stared at it and felt a vein throb in my temple. Tiffany knew I hated chicken noodle soup. When she was a child and sick with the flu, Catherine would make clam chowder from scratch, creamy and rich with fresh thyme. Chicken soup was what we ate when we were poor before the business took off. It was the taste of struggle, and she brought it here as a comfort. It was a testament to how little she actually knew me or how little she cared to remember. "I am not hungry," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. "Oh, do not be silly. You need to keep your strength up," she said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. She placed a large orange handbag on the floor next to her. My eyes locked onto it immediately. It was a Hermes Birkin. Not a knockoff, but the real deal. The leather was ostrich skin, the hardware was gold. I did the math in my head instantly. That bag retail was easily $25,000. On the resale market, it could go for $40,000. Last week, she was crying about being behind on her mortgage. Today, she was carrying a luxury sedan on her arm. She noticed me looking at the bag and shifted her leg to block my view, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before the mask of the concerned daughter slipped back into place. "I have some paperwork for you to sign, Dad," she said, reaching into the bag and pulling out a blue folder. "It is just administrative, boring stuff. You know how these places are. They need authorization for your insurance payments and to release funds for your monthly care fees." She opened the folder and smoothed a document out on the tray table, pushing aside the unwanted soup. She uncapped a heavy fountain pen and held it out to me. Her fingers were manicured a blood-red color that looked violent against the white paper. "Just sign right there at the bottom," she said, tapping the line. I looked at the document. The text was dense, single-spaced legalese, but my eyes were trained to spot the devil in the details. The header did not say medical authorization. It said general asset liquidation and transfer request. This was not about paying for my room and board. This was a sweeping order to empty my primary checking account, the one I used for operating expenses, the one that had over $2 million in liquid cash. "I cannot sign this, Tiffany," I said, looking up at her. "This is not for insurance. This is a withdrawal slip." Her smile faltered. The dutiful daughter vanished, and for a second I saw the predator beneath. "Do not be difficult, Dad," she hissed, leaning in closer so the nurse could not hear. "We are doing this to protect your money. The courts can freeze everything if they think you are incompetent. We are just moving it to a safe harbor account." Safe harbor. The only safe harbor Tiffany knew was the Neiman Marcus shoe department. I looked at her desperate, greedy eyes. If I refused, she would just forge it later, or worse, she would tell Brad to tighten the screws. They could increase my medication. They could put me in solitary. I needed to play the game. I needed them to think they had won, so they would get sloppy. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled exaggeratedly. I let the tip of the pen hover over the signature line. "I do not know, Tiffany," I muttered, letting my jaw slacken a bit. "I feel so tired. The numbers are swimming." "Just sign your name, Dad." She urged, her voice tight with impatience. "Just like you always do. Harrison J. Caldwell. Do it for me. Do it so I can take care of you." I touched the pen to the paper. I wrote my name. Harrison J. Caldwell. To the untrained eye, it looked exactly like the signature on my driver's license and my checks. But as I rounded the loop of the J, I intentionally broke the line. I left a microscopic gap at the top of the letter. Years ago, when I started landing government contracts, I had a security protocol set up with my private bankers. I told them that if I ever signed a document where the loop of the J was broken, it meant I was signing under duress. It meant the signature was void, and they were to freeze the transaction and alert the authorities immediately. It was a fail-safe I never thought I would use against my own child. I finished the signature and let the pen drop from my fingers as if the effort had exhausted me. "There," I whispered. "Is that what you wanted?" Tiffany snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. She scanned it, her eyes lighting up with a mixture of relief and avarice. She did not look at the loop. She only saw the millions flowing into her grasp. She shoved the paper back into the folder and tucked it safely into her $25,000 bag. "You did good, Dad," she said, patting my hand with a touch that felt like ice. "This will make everything so much easier. We can finally get things in order." She stood up, smoothing her coat, preparing to leave. She had gotten what she came for. The soup was cold. The father was used. The visit was over. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, pausing at the door and turning back with a cruel smirk. "Brad wanted me to thank you. Since the funds are clearing tomorrow, he is going to take the vintage Bentley out of storage. He has always loved that car. He thinks it will look great parked next to his Range Rover. He is going to get it detailed this afternoon." My heart hammered against my ribs. The 1952 Bentley R-Type Continental. It was my pride and joy. It was the car I drove Catherine to our anniversary dinner in every year for 30 years. It was a piece of art, not a vehicle. And Brad, that tasteless gambler, was going to drive it. That car requires a double-clutch technique, I said, my voice straining. He will strip the gears. He does not know how to drive it. Tiffany laughed, a light, airy sound that echoed in the sterile room. I do not think he cares, Dad. It is his car now. Just like this is your home now. Get some rest. You look terrible. She walked out the door, her heels clicking on the linoleum, fading away down the hall. I sat there staring at the cold chicken soup. A single tear of pure, unadulterated rage rolled down my cheek. Enjoy the car, Brad, I thought. Enjoy the money, Tiffany. Because when that bank clerk sees the broken loop on the J, the only thing you will be driving is a prison bus. You just walked out with a loaded gun thinking it was a winning lottery ticket. And you have no idea that I just pulled the trigger. The lights in the ward were extinguished at exactly 9 o'clock, leaving only the faint green glow of the emergency exit signs and the rhythmic blinking of the surveillance camera in the corner. Silence in Sunny Meadows was not peaceful, it was heavy and suffocating, like a wool blanket pressed over your face. From the bed next to mine came the sound of Julian's breathing, shallow and ragged, a constant reminder of what happened to men who stopped fighting. I lay perfectly still under the thin, scratchy sheets, counting the seconds. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and even. I had to wait for the patrol. At 2 in the morning, the night nurse did her rounds. I heard the heavy click of the magnetic lock disengaging and saw the beam of a flashlight sweep across the room. It lingered on Julian, then moved to me. I kept my eyes closed, my mouth slightly open, feigning the deep sleep of the medicated. The beam moved away. The door clicked shut. I waited another 10 minutes just to be sure. Then I moved. I did not sit up. That would trigger the motion sensors if the camera was advanced enough. Instead, I slid my hand down beneath the covers, moving with the agonizing slowness of a glacier. My joints screamed in protest, but I pushed the pain aside. My fingers found the cold leather of my left shoe, which I had managed to kick under the covers earlier in the evening, while pretending to have a leg cramp. I found the heel. It was stiff, but I knew the mechanism. I applied pressure to the inner sole, twisting it counterclockwise. There was a tiny, almost inaudible pop. The heel compartment slid open. My fingers brushed against the cool plastic of the micro GSM phone. It was the size of a car key fob, a piece of spycraft I had acquired years ago during a volatile negotiation in Beirut. I pulled it out and shielded it deep within the folds of the blanket, creating a tent of darkness so the faint light of the screen would not be visible to the camera lens above. I pressed the power button. The battery icon flickered to life, showing 2 bars. It was enough. I did not dial a number. I held down the number 1 key, which was speed-dialed to a secure line in Zurich. The phone did not ring. It simply connected with a soft, static hiss. "Secure line active," a voice said. It was crisp, accented, and utterly professional. "Identify." "Bluebird 1975. I whispered, my lips barely moving against the microphone. "Authorization code Omega." There was a pause, a long, terrible pause where the only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. Then the voice returned, and it was no longer robotic. It was Stefan, my personal banker for 20 years. "Mr. Caldwell," Stefan said, and I could hear the tension in his voice even across the Atlantic. "We received your signal on the document transfer yesterday. The broken loop on the letter J. We immediately flagged all accounts for suspicious activity." "Thank God," I breathed out, closing my eyes. "Freeze them, Stefan. Freeze everything. Do not let those vultures take another dime." "Mr. Caldwell." "Listen to me," Stefan cut in, his tone urgent. "We have frozen the offshore transfers, but you need to know the extent of the damage. The signal came too late for some assets. They did not just use digital transfers. They physically breached your study. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My study was my fortress. The safe inside was a vintage Diebold steel vault built into the foundation of the house. It was supposed to be impenetrable. "What do you mean breached?" I asked, my voice trembling. Stefan sighed, the sound of a man delivering a death sentence. "We received an alert from the private security firm monitoring the sensors inside the vault. They bypassed the combination. They drilled it, Mr. Caldwell. A diamond-tipped industrial drill. They emptied the physical contents 3 days ago. The emergency cash reserve, the bearer bonds, the gold bullion. It is all gone." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. That safe held $500,000 in untraceable cash, my rainy day fund. It also held Catherine's diamond necklace, the one I gave her when Tiffany was born. They had drilled through steel to steal their own mother's legacy. Brad must have hired professionals. He did not have the skill to drill a Diebold. This was premeditated. This was organized. "There is more," Stefan continued, and this time his voice dropped to a whisper. "We are tracking a massive liquidation of your blue-chip stocks. They are selling at a loss just to get the cash quickly. We are trying to halt the trades, but the orders were placed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It will take lawyers and time to reverse it. Time you might not have." I gripped the tiny phone so hard, I thought the plastic would crack. They were stripping me clean. They were not just taking the fruit, they were chopping down the tree. "Stop the bleeding, Stefan," I hissed. "I don't care what it costs. Hire the best litigators in Geneva. But I need to know about the real estate. Tell me they haven't touched the Martha's Vineyard house." There was silence on the line. A silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room under my blanket. Stefan talked to me. "Mr. Caldwell." "That is actually why I was about to call the emergency number when you dialed in," Stefan said slowly. "The deed transfer for the property at 88 Ocean Drive was flagged in our system 10 minutes ago. It was a rush job. Expedited processing." I felt a wave of nausea. "Who?" I asked. "Who bought it?" "The purchase price was $4.5 million, Stefan read from the screen. "A cash offer. No inspection. No contingencies. The buyer is listed as a holding company called V Corp Global." V Corp. The name sounded generic, corporate, harmless. But I knew the industry. I knew the players. Who is behind V Corp, Stefan? Dig deeper. I heard the sound of typing on a keyboard, rapid and percussive. "Let me see. V Corp is a subsidiary of..." He stopped. "Who is it, Stefan?" "It is Vanguard Corp, Mr. Caldwell." The blood drained from my face. My body went cold, instantly shivering violently under the thin hospital blanket. Vanguard Corp. To the public, they were a massive luxury development firm. To those of us in the construction business, they were the devil. They were known for two things: building monstrosities of glass and steel that destroyed local communities and burying anyone who got in their way. Rumors had swirled for years about their connections to organized crime, about safety inspectors who vanished, about homeowners who refused to sell and then woke up to find their houses burning down. They were not just developers. They were erasers. If Vanguard bought the beach house, they wouldn't just renovate it. They would bulldoze it within a week to build high-rise condos. They would destroy the garden Catherine planted. They would crush the gazebo where we renewed our vows. And worse, if Vanguard was involved, it meant Brad had borrowed money from them. You don't sell to Vanguard for quick cash unless you owe dangerous people a lot of money. Stefan. I whispered, my voice barely a thread. You have to stop that sale. I cannot, Stefan said apologetically. The funds have cleared. The title has transferred. It is done. Vanguard owns the property. I stared into the darkness of my blanket tent. The horror was total. My daughter and her husband had not just sold my home. They had sold it to a monster that would chew it up and spit it out. And if Vanguard found out about the legal issues with the land, the fact that the house was just a guest house on a trust-protected estate, they would not sue Brad. They would kill him. And they might come for me too, just to tie up loose ends. I hung up the phone. I slid it back into the heel of my shoe and snapped it shut. I lay there in the dark, listening to Julian's ragged breathing. My fear had transmuted into something else. It was no longer just about survival. It was about war. Brad had brought a shark into our swimming pool thinking it was a pet. He had no idea he had just invited the executioner to dinner. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I prayed. Not for salvation, but for enough time to watch them fall. The silence in the room after I hung up with the Swiss banker was heavy enough to crush a man. I sat there in the dark, clutching the tiny phone that was my only lifeline, and tried to process the magnitude of the disaster. My family had not just stolen from me, they had sold my sanctuary to a corporate executioner. Vanguard Corp did not negotiate, they bulldozed. If they found out they had been sold a guest house instead of the main estate, they would not file a lawsuit, they would send a cleaner. And right now I was the only loose end that could tie Brad to the fraud. I was about to slide the phone back into my heel when I saw headlights sweep across the ceiling. The beam cut through the darkness like a searchlight. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, not in the main parking lot, but right outside my window. This wing of sunny meadows faced the service entrance, a secluded spot, where the staff smoked cigarettes and complained about their wages. I slid out of bed, moving with the silent, practiced ease of a man who had spent his youth dodging falling debris on construction sites. I pressed my back against the cold wall next to the window. Through the slats of the heavy security blinds, I saw the silhouette of a car. It was the Range Rover. Brad's Range Rover. He had come back presumably to pick up Tiffany, or perhaps to gloat one last time before driving off into his stolen sunset. He stepped out of the car. The orange glow of a cigarette lighter flared, illuminating his face. He looked agitated. He was pacing back and forth, kicking at the gravel. He pulled his phone from his pocket, not the cheap burner he likely used for his bookies, but his main line. He dialed a number and put it to his ear. The window was double-paned, reinforced plexiglass, designed to keep sound in and the world out. But Brad was arrogant. He was speaking loudly, his voice carrying in the crisp night air, and the ventilation intake for the room was located right below the windowsill. It was a design flaw I had noticed the moment I walked in. Sound traveled through the metal ductwork like a whisper in a cathedral. I knelt down, placing my ear against the cold metal grate of the vent. "Hey, baby, it is me," Brad said. His voice was different. It was not the condescending tone he used with me, or the fake, supportive tone he used with Tiffany. It was the voice of a man desperate to impress. "Yeah, it is done," he continued, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "The funds cleared an hour ago. 4.5 million. I know, I told you I would fix it." I held my breath. He was not talking to Tiffany. Tiffany was likely still in the lobby signing the final admission papers. "Listen, tell the loan shark he will have his money by morning," Brad said, pacing faster. "All of it. The principal and the VIG. I do not want those guys coming near the condo again. And hey, tell the dean at St. Jude's that Leo's tuition is covered for the next 5 years. Yeah, cash up front. I want the kid to have the best." My blood ran cold. Leo. Brad and Tiffany did not have children. Tiffany had been trying for years, spending thousands on fertility treatments that Brad always complained were too expensive. But here he was paying tuition for a child named Leo. He had a second family. He was stripping my legacy to build a future for a son my daughter did not even know existed. I heard the woman on the other end say something muffled. Brad laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Tiffany," he sneered, "do not worry about her. She is a stupid cow. She thinks we are putting the money into a trust to protect her dad. She actually thanked me for handling the finances. Can you believe that? She is so desperate for me to love her, she will sign anything I put in front of her. She is a useful idiot babe, that is all. Once the money is moved to the Cayman accounts, I am filing for divorce. I will leave her with the debt and the old man. I gripped the metal bars of the vent until my fingers turned white. A stupid cow. That was what he called the woman who had nursed him through his own failures, the woman who had defied her father to marry him. I had plenty of reasons to be angry with Tiffany. She was greedy, she was weak, and she was ungrateful. But she was still my daughter. She was still the little girl I had carried on my shoulders at the beach. Hearing this parasite speak of her with such contempt ignited a fire in my belly that burned hotter than any furnace I had ever stoked. But the conversation was not over. And what came next made the betrayal of Tiffany seem like a minor infraction. Yeah, there is one hiccup, Brad said, his voice dropping lower, but still audible through the vent. The legal department at Vanguard is asking for the original land survey. They want to verify the property lines before they break ground next week. He paused, listening. I know, he snapped. I know that if they see the survey, they will realize they bought the guest house and not the mansion. That is fraud. That is 20 years in federal prison. But I have a plan. I pressed my ear harder against the grate, straining to hear every syllable. The old man, Brad said. Harrison. He is the only one who knows the history of the land separation. The lawyer Stone has the papers, but he cannot release them without Harrison's consent or what I thought. Or if Harrison dies, Brad said. The world stopped. The humming of the refrigerator, the beating of my own heart. Everything fell silent. If he dies in the facility this week, it goes to probate. Brad explained calmly, as if discussing a dinner reservation. In probate, the deed transfer gets locked in. Vanguard won't look twice at the survey if the previous owner is dead. They will just want to close the file. And let us be honest, babe, he is 70. He has a heart condition. If he happens to have a cardiac arrest tonight or tomorrow, nobody is going to ask questions. I already slipped the night nurse $5,000 to look the other way if the monitors go off. I pulled away from the vent slowly, my back sliding down the wall, until I hit the floor. I sat there in the darkness, staring at my trembling hands. This was not just a heist anymore. This was an execution. Brad threw his cigarette butt on the ground and crushed it with the heel of his shoe, my shoe, the expensive loafers he had stolen from me. I have to go pick up the cow, he said. I will call you when it is done. Kiss Leo for me. I heard the car door slam. The engine roared to life and the tires crunched on the gravel as he drove around to the front entrance. I sat alone in room 302. The silence returned, but now it was filled with the screaming of my own survival instincts. They were not planning to keep me here for years. They were not even planning to keep me here for the week. Brad had put a price on my head, and he had already paid the executioner, the nurse, the one who had smiled at me. She was paid to let me die. I looked over at Julian sleeping in the next bed. He was safe because he was worth nothing to anyone. But I was a liability. I was a loose end in a $4 million fraud. I stood up. The pain in my joints was gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that made me feel 30 years younger. I could not wait for Benedict Stone to file an injunction. I could not wait for the bank to freeze the accounts. By the time the legal system turned its gears, I would be a corpse in a morgue, and Brad would be on a flight to the Caymans. I looked at the heavy steel door. Locked. I looked at the window. Reinforced. I looked at the camera blinking its rhythmic red eye. I am not dying in this room, I whispered to the empty air. I did not survive the recession of 2008. I did not survive the death of my wife, and I did not survive 40 years in the cutthroat world of Boston construction just to be taken out by a gambling addict with a cheap suit. I walked over to the fire sprinkler head on the ceiling. It was my only way out. It would be messy. It would be dangerous. But tonight, Harrison Caldwell was checking out of Sunny Meadows. And when I got out, I was going to bring the whole damn building down on top of them. I reached for my heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. It was time to go to work. I unplugged the heavy brass lamp on the bedside table and ripped the cord from the wall socket with a savage jerk that sent a jolt of pain through my arthritic shoulder. I did not have wire cutters, but I had teeth and I had desperation. I gnawed through the insulation, stripping the copper wire bare. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a man who has decided that if he is going to go down, he is going to take the whole building with him. I dragged the chair to the center of the room, directly under the fire sprinkler head. In a modern building like this, the sprinkler system is triggered by a heat-sensitive bulb, usually glycerin-based, that expands and shatters at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Once that bulb breaks, the water pressure drops, and that drop triggers the main alarm. It is simple physics. It is the kind of structural engineering I had mastered 40 years ago, and now it was my key to freedom. I wrapped the exposed copper wire around the metal cage of the sprinkler head, creating a crude heating coil. I plugged the frayed end of the cord back into the socket. There was a spark, a hiss, and the smell of burning ozone. I scrambled back onto the bed and pulled the heavy wool blanket over my head just as the world exploded. The heat shattered the bulb. The water did not trickle. It blasted out with the force of a fire hose, a torrent of black stagnant sludge that had been sitting in the pipes for years, followed by freezing cold water. The alarm screamed a sound so loud it vibrated in my teeth. It was a piercing electronic shriek designed to cause panic, and it was working perfectly. The magnetic lock on the door disengaged automatically. Fire code. You cannot trap people in a burning building. The door swung open, and I heard chaos in the hallway. Nurses were shouting. Patients were screaming in confusion. The strobe lights were flashing blinding white pulses that turned the corridor into a disorienting nightmare. I threw off the blanket. I was soaked to the bone, the cold water shocking my system, but I moved. I grabbed my shoes, my precious loafers with the phone hidden in the heel, and jammed my feet into them. I looked at Julian. He was sitting up, eyes wide with terror. "Stay here, Julian," I shouted over the alarm. "Stay here and look confused. They won't hurt you." I ran into the hallway. It was a stampede. The orderlies, who usually looked so imposing, were now running around like headless chickens trying to herd confused elderly people toward the exits. The floor was slick with water. I slipped my knee, hitting the hard linoleum with a crack that made me cry out, but I scrambled up. I did not run toward the main exit where the staff was gathering. I ran against the flow toward the service wing. Nurse Holloway was standing at the nurse's station, screaming into a phone, her hair plastered to her skull by the water. She did not even see me. I was just another shadow in the strobe lights. I pushed through the double doors marked "Kitchen Staff Only." The kitchen was empty. The staff had evacuated, leaving burners on and ovens open. The smell of burnt toast mixed with the metallic tang of the sprinklers. I saw the loading dock doors at the back. They were open. A massive garbage truck was idling outside its compactor, whirring. This was it. The midnight pickup. I ran to the dock. The truck driver was not in the cab. He was probably standing under the awning, having a smoke, waiting for the alarm to stop. The back of the truck was a gaping maw filled with black plastic bags and loose food waste. I did not hesitate. I could not afford to. I climbed onto the metal rim of the dumpster bin that was attached to the back of the truck. My suit, my beautiful Italian wool suit, was heavy with water dragging me down. I swung my leg over and dropped into the abyss. I landed on something soft and wet. The smell hit me instantly, a physical blow to the senses. It was the stench of rotting vegetables, sour milk, and decaying meat, all magnified by the humidity of the truck. I gagged, my stomach heaving, but I forced myself to burrow deeper. I pulled black garbage bags over me, creating a nest of filth to hide my body. I felt something slimy crawl over my hand. A rat. I bit my lip until I tasted blood to keep from screaming. I lay there buried in the refuse of the very institution that had tried to throw me away. The irony was not lost on me. They treated me like trash, so I became trash to escape them. The truck engine roared. The hydraulic arms lifted the bin. For a second I was suspended in the air, and I prayed that the compactor was not on an automatic cycle. If the blade came down now, I would be crushed into paste along with the leftover lasagna. The bin tilted. I slid tumbling down into the main cargo hold of the truck. I hit the metal floor hard, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Debris rained down on me. I curled into a fetal position, covering my head with my arms. The truck began to move. The ride was a torture I never could have imagined. Every pothole, every turn sent me slamming against the steel walls. The smell was suffocating. The darkness was absolute. I was freezing cold, wet, and covered in slime, but my mind was razor sharp. I thought about Tiffany sleeping in her silk sheets. I thought about Brad driving my Bentley. I used my hatred as fuel. I used my rage to keep my heart beating when my body wanted to give up. I checked the time on the internal clock of my mind. We had been driving for 20 minutes. We were on the highway now, I could tell by the speed and the steady vibration. I needed to get out before we reached the landfill. If I ended up in the dump, I would be buried under tons of waste before I could dig myself out. The truck began to slow down. I heard the hiss of air brakes. We were stopping. Maybe a toll booth. Maybe a red light. I dragged myself toward the rear release lever. It was a safety mechanism I knew existed on this model of truck, because my company had built the garage for the sanitation department 10 years ago. I groped in the dark, my fingers slick with grease, until I found the cold metal handle. I pulled. It was rusted, stuck. I gritted my teeth and pulled with everything I had, with every ounce of frustration and anger that had built up over the last week. The lever groaned and gave way. The back hatch cracked open. A slice of the world appeared. Rain was falling in sheets illuminated by the orange glow of streetlights. We were moving, but slowly. I did not wait for a complete stop. I rolled. I threw my body out of the truck, hitting the wet asphalt hard. I tumbled, skinning my palms and tearing my pants, but I was out. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, letting the rain wash the filth from my face. I staggered to my feet. I was on the shoulder of a deserted highway. It was 3 in the morning. I was shivering violently, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I looked like a monster covered in sludge and blood, limping along the breakdown lane. Headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the rain. I froze. If it was the police, they would take me back. If it was Brad, well, I would fight him with my bare hands. The car slowed down. It was a black sedan, sleek and expensive. It pulled over onto the shoulder 20 feet ahead of me. The engine idled, a low purr. The windows were tinted dark. I stood my ground, clutching a rock I had picked up from the roadside. I was ready to die right there on the pavement rather than go back to that cage. The passenger window rolled down slowly. A face appeared in the shadows. I squinted against the rain, trying to see. Was it an assassin sent by Vanguard? Was it a savior? "Get in, Harrison," the voice called out over the sound of the storm. I dropped the rock. My legs finally gave out, and I fell to my knees, not in defeat, but in relief. The game had just changed, because I knew that voice. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't alone anymore. The car door opened, and I collapsed onto the soft leather of the back seat. I expected a stranger, but instead, I saw a familiar face in the rearview mirror. It was Thomas Benedict Stone's personal driver for the last 20 years. He didn't say a word, didn't ask why I was covered in slime or why I smelled like a landfill. He simply handed me a thick towel and a flask of aged scotch. That is the kind of loyalty money cannot buy, but respect earns over a lifetime. We drove in silence through the rain-slicked streets of Boston, winding our way toward the financial district. I used the towel to wipe the grime from my face and took a long pull from the flask. The burn of the alcohol woke up my senses, chasing away the chill of the garbage truck. I watched the city pass by the city I had helped build and felt a strange sense of detachment. The Harrison Caldwell who had been dragged out of his home yesterday was dead. The man in the back of this car was something else entirely. We pulled into the underground garage of the Stone & Associates building. Thomas led me to a private elevator that opened directly into Benedict's penthouse office. Benedict was waiting for me. He was wearing his silk robe, holding a tumbler of whiskey, looking like he hadn't slept either. When he saw me, he didn't gasp or recoil. He just walked over and embraced me, ignoring the stench of my ordeal. "Go get cleaned up, Harrison," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "The shower is running. There is a fresh suit on the bed. We have work to do." I spent an hour in that bathroom scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of sunny meadows. I shaved off the stubble that had grown over the last week, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked different. They were harder, colder. I put on the suit Benedict had laid out. It was one of mine, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. As I tightened my tie, I felt the armor clicking back into place. The victim was gone. The titan of industry was back. I walked into the office. Benedict was sitting at his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of old files. The room smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, a scent that had always comforted me. He poured me a drink and pointed to a map spread out on the desk. It was a survey map of my Martha's Vineyard estate dated 1995. "I found it," Harrison Benedict said, tapping the paper. "You were right. The original subdivision plans." I looked down at the map. It was a masterpiece of legal foresight. 25 years ago, when I bought the land, it was one massive parcel. But when I built the guest house, the small cottage near the beach, I had legally subdivided the land. I did it for tax purposes originally, but then I put the main estate, the mansion, and the 2 acres of gardens into an irrevocable trust for Catherine. When she died, that trust didn't dissolve. It just went dormant, waiting for a beneficiary. "So let me get this straight," Benedict said, leaning back in his chair. "Tiffany and Brad used the power of attorney to sell the property at 88 Ocean Drive." "Correct," I said, taking a sip of the scotch. But Benedict continued, a slow smile spreading across his face. 88. Ocean Drive is just the guest house. The main mansion, the one they think they sold, is actually 88A Ocean Drive. It is a completely separate legal entity." "Exactly," I said. "The deed they signed over to Vanguard Corp lists 88 Ocean Drive. They sold them a 2-bedroom cottage for $4.5 million. Vanguard thinks they bought the whole estate. They think they bought the land to build their high-rises, but they didn't. They bought a shack and a patch of sand. The rest of the land they actually need, is untouchable." Benedict started to laugh, a deep belly laugh that shook his frame. "Oh, that is beautiful. That is absolutely diabolical. Brad is going to walk into a meeting with Vanguard thinking he is a millionaire and walk out with a target on his back. But Harrison, you know what this means for Vanguard?" I nodded. "I know. Vanguard doesn't sue for mistakes like this. They destroy people. When they find out Brad defrauded them, they will come for blood." Benedict stopped laughing and looked at me with serious eyes. "And that brings us to the hard part. The trust documents. I can activate the clause that reveals the true ownership. I can prove that the sale was fraudulent based on the property lines. But if I do that, if I expose this, it is not just Brad who goes down. Tiffany signed those papers too. She is a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "If we play this card, Harrison Tiffany goes to prison. Not for a few months, but for years. Federal prison, fraud, grand larceny, elder abuse. She will be destroyed. She is your daughter. Are you sure you want to do this?" I walked over to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline. I saw the cranes in the distance, the steel skeletons of new buildings rising up. I thought about the little girl I used to take to those job sites. the one who used to wear a plastic hard hat and hold my hand. I thought about the woman who had stood in my bedroom and watched strangers drag me away. I thought about the soup she brought me, the soup I hated. I thought about the loop in my signature she didn't even notice. She made her choice, Benedict, I said softly. She didn't just steal my money. She stole my life. She put me in a cage and waited for me to die so she could buy handbags and vacations. She isn't my daughter anymore. She is just an accomplice. I turned back to him. My voice was steady, cold. Do it. File the papers. Alert the Vanguard legal team. But don't tell them everything yet. Just tell them there is a discrepancy in the survey. Let them find out the rest on their own. I want to be there when the hammer drops. Benedict nodded slowly, picking up his pen. You are a hard man, Harrison. I was a good father once, I replied. Look where that got me. Now I have to be a judge. He began to write, drafting the legal instrument that would seal my daughter's fate. I watched the pen move, scratching across the paper like the sound of a shovel digging a grave. I felt a twinge of pain in my chest, a ghost of the love I once had, but I pushed it down. I pushed it down deep where I kept the memories of the garbage truck and the electric fence. There is one more thing, I said. Find out where they are. I know Brad mentioned a party. Benedict checked his phone. His investigator had been busy. They are at the Sapphire Room. It is a private dining club downtown. They rented out the main hall for a celebration tonight. A celebration, I repeated. Celebrating my demise. Celebrating their victory. I finished my drink and set the glass down on the desk with a sharp click. Get the car, Thomas, I said. I think it is time I crashed a party. Benedict stood up. I am coming with you. You are going to need a lawyer when the police show up. And Harrison, please tell me you are not going to do anything violent. I adjusted my cufflinks. The gold glinted in the office light. Violence is for thugs like Brad, I said. I am going to do something much worse. I am going to tell the truth. As we walked to the elevator, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The anger had crystallized into a cold, hard purpose. I was going to walk into that room and I was going to burn their world down with a single piece of paper. They wanted my legacy. Well, they were about to get it. All of it. And it was going to crush them. The elevator doors closed and we began our descent. The old fox was coming out of his hole and the hunt was on. But this time the hunter was the prey, and he didn't even know it yet. I checked my watch. Not the Patek Philippe Brad had stolen, but a simple, reliable field watch. It was 7 p.m. The party was just getting started. Perfect timing for a ghost to arrive. Benedict dimmed the lights in his office and the massive flat-screen monitor on the wall flickered to life. His private investigator, a man named Silas, who moved like a shadow and spoke even less, had uploaded the surveillance files only moments ago. The timestamp on the video was from 2 hours earlier. The location was the erratic sweeping deck of the Serafina, a 100-foot luxury yacht docked at the marina. It was a vessel I knew well because I had built the pier it was moored to, but I had never stepped foot on it. It was a floating palace for the nouveau riche, the kind of place where people went to be seen spending money they did not earn. I watched in silence as the camera zoomed in. The deck was crowded with people I vaguely recognized from the social columns. Hangers on sycophants and fair-weather friends who would drink your champagne and then step over your body to get to the next party. In the center of it all, holding court like royalty, were Tiffany and Brad. Tiffany was wearing a silver dress that looked like it was made of liquid mercury. It was tight, flashy, and expensive. She was standing on one of the lounge chairs holding a magnum of Cristal in one hand and waving the other in the air. Even through the grainy resolution of the long-lens camera, I could see she was drunk. Her movements were sloppy, her laughter too loud and too manic. She was shouting something to the crowd, and Benedict turned up the volume. To the future, she screamed, her voice slurring slightly. To Harrison, Caldwell, may he rest in peace in his new home. And to us, the new kings of Boston. The crowd cheered. I watched my daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, raise a toast to my imprisonment. But it was what was on her finger that made my stomach turn. As she raised her glass, the deck lights caught the sparkle of a ring. It was a canary yellow diamond, the size of a quail egg. I knew that stone. I had seen it in the catalog of a private jeweler in New York a few months ago. It cost $300,000. She had bought it with the liquidation funds from my operating account. She was wearing my hard work on her finger like a trophy, while I had been rotting in a pile of garbage. Benedict paused the video. Look at her, Harrison. She thinks she has won the lottery. She has no idea she is standing on a trapdoor. Play the rest, I said, my voice flat. Show me Brad. The video resumed. The camera panned away from Tiffany, who was now dancing unsteadily with a group of strangers. It followed Brad. He was moving through the crowd, shaking hands, clapping men on the back, playing the part of the benevolent tycoon. But he wasn't smiling with his eyes. He kept checking his phone, checking the exits, checking his watch. He looked like a man who was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He slipped away from the main party, moving toward the stern of the yacht, where the shadows were deeper. The investigator had anticipated this. The camera switched to a night vision mode, turning the world into a ghostly green. Brad leaned against the railing, lighting a cigarette. A moment later, a woman stepped out of the shadows to join him. She was young blonde, and judging by the way she walked, she knew exactly what she wanted. It was the woman from the phone call, the mother of his secret child. Brad pulled her in close, kissing her with a passion he had never shown my daughter. I watched as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a velvet pouch. He poured the contents into her hand. Even in the green tint of the night vision, I recognized the shape. It was Catherine's diamond necklace, the one from the safe, the one I had given her on our 25th anniversary. I promise you, baby. Brad said, his voice picked up by a directional microphone. This is just the beginning. Once the old man kicks the bucket and I divorce the cow, we are going to disappear. We will go to the south of France. I already put the deposit down on a villa in Nice. The woman laughed, trailing her fingers down his chest. And what about Tiffany? What if she fights for the money? Brad snorted, blowing smoke into the night air. Tiffany won't fight. She is going to be too busy dealing with the IRS. I put all the shell companies in her name. When the dust settles, she will be broke and in jail, and we will be sipping wine on the Mediterranean. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had known Brad was a snake, but I had underestimated the depth of his venom. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was setting Tiffany up to take the fall for everything. He was going to leave my daughter destitute and imprisoned while he lived off my legacy with another woman. I looked at Tiffany on the screen, still dancing and still laughing, oblivious to the knife her husband was holding to her back. I hated her for what she had done to me, but she was still my blood. And no one spills Caldwell blood but me. Turn it off, I said. I have seen enough. Benedict killed the feed. The screen went black, leaving us in the dim light of the office. He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. We have everything we need, Harrison. The video proves premeditation. It proves the conspiracy. We can go to the police right now. I was about to answer when the phone in the heel of my shoe buzzed. It was a long, sustained vibration. The emergency signal. I reached down and retrieved the tiny device. The screen was flashing red. There was a text message from an unknown number. It was short, encrypted, and terrifying. It was from my contact inside the banking world, a man who monitored high-risk transactions for institutions like Vanguard. Asset recovery team deployed. Target Brad Sterling. Location Sapphire Room. ETA 20 minutes. Authorization level 0. I showed the message to Benedict. His face went pale. Authorization level 0 means no witnesses, Harrison. Vanguard figured it out. They looked at the survey. They know they bought a guest house. They are not sending lawyers. They are sending a cleanup crew. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. The Sapphire Room. That is where they moved the party after the yacht. Harrison, you cannot go there, Benedict said, standing up to block my path. If Vanguard is sending a team, it is going to be a bloodbath. They will kill Brad and anyone standing next to him. That includes Tiffany. That is exactly why I have to go, I said, checking the load on the pistol Benedict kept in his desk drawer, a relic from his days as a prosecutor. I slid the gun into my waistband. I am not going to let a corporation kill my family, Benedict. I am going to destroy them legally. I am going to strip them of every penny they have, but I need them alive to do it. If Vanguard kills Brad tonight, he becomes a victim. He becomes a tragedy. I want him to live long enough to be a prisoner. I walked to the door. Benedict grabbed his coat. I am driving, he said. You are legally blind, remember? We ran to the elevator. The clock was ticking. Vanguard was efficient. If they were 20 minutes out, that meant we had maybe 15. I had to get to the Sapphire Room, break up the party, and get Brad and Tiffany into police custody before the hit squad arrived. As the elevator descended, I thought about the irony. I had spent the last week plotting my revenge, dreaming of the moment I would crush them. Now I was racing to save their lives, just so I could be the one to end them properly. The old fox was out of the hole, and tonight I was going to show them all that you do not hunt in my forest without my permission. The party was over. The lesson was about to begin. The Sapphire Room was a monument to excess located on the top floor of the city's tallest hotel. It was a place where the walls were lined with blue velvet and the chandeliers dripped with crystals that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. I knew the specifications of this room intimately because my company had reinforced the steel girders that supported the ceiling 20 years ago. I knew exactly how much weight the floor could hold, and tonight I was about to test its limits. The elevator ride up had been silent. Benedict had stayed in the lobby coordinating with the police and the Vanguard legal team while I ascended alone. I needed to do this part by myself. I needed to look them in the eye, not as a victim surrounded by lawyers, but as the patriarch they had tried to erase. The doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a dinner bell announcing the main course. I stepped out into the foyer. Two young hostesses looked up from their podiums, their smiles practiced and vacant. They did not recognize me. To them, I was just another old man in an expensive suit, perhaps a lost investor or a late arrival. I walked past them without a word, pushing open the heavy double mahogany doors that led into the main ballroom. The noise hit me first. It was a wall of sound composed of clinking glasses, raucous laughter, and the heavy bass of a pop song that was currently popular with people half my age. The room was packed. There were at least 200 people inside. I recognized some of them. There were business rivals I had defeated decades ago, distant cousins who had never called when Catherine died, and a swarm of social climbers who followed money like sharks follow blood. I stood at the top of the short staircase that led down to the dance floor. I did not move. I just stood there, letting my presence radiate outward. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the one I wore to board meetings when I intended to fire someone. My back was straight, my chin held high, and my eyes were scanning the room for my targets. It started slowly. A waiter near the entrance dropped a tray of champagne flutes. The crash was sharp and dissonant, cutting through the music. People turned to look at the mess, and then their eyes traveled up to me. The whispers began. They spread like a contagion, moving from table to table. The laughter died down. The dancing stopped. The DJ, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, faded the music out, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the murmuring of the confused crowd. In the center of the room, near a towering ice sculpture of a swan, stood Tiffany and Brad. They were holding court, their backs to me, basking in the admiration of their sycophants. Tiffany was laughing, her head thrown back, her neck exposing the diamond necklace she had stolen from her dead mother. Brad was puffing on a cigar, looking like the king of the world. Someone tapped Tiffany on the shoulder and pointed. She turned around, annoyance flashing across her face at the interruption. Then she saw me. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crystal flute she was holding slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered the sound, echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. The champagne splashed onto her silver dress, but she did not even notice. She was staring at a ghost. She was staring at the man she had drugged, kidnapped, and left to rot in a garbage truck. Brad turned to see what she was looking at. His reaction was different. He did not freeze. He flinched. It was the instinctive reaction of a criminal who realizes the police have found him. His eyes darted to the exits, but he saw only the closed doors behind me. He looked at the crowd, realizing that his triumph was dissolving into a spectacle. He tried to compose himself, forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. "Harrison," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad, we didn't expect you. We thought you were resting." I did not answer. I began to walk down the stairs. My steps were slow and deliberate. The crowd parted for me, creating a wide path. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They saw the mud on my shoes that I hadn't been able to fully scrub off. They saw the scratches on my hands. They saw the fire in my eyes. I was not the frail old man Brad had described to them. I was a storm front moving in. I walked straight to the small stage where the band had been playing. I picked up the microphone from its stand. It was heavy in my hand, a weapon of mass communication. I tapped it once. The sound thumped through the massive speakers, making half the room jump. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice booming through the hall, calm and steady. "I know you are all here to celebrate the new wealth of the Sterling family. I know you are enjoying the open bar and the expensive hors d'oeuvres. But there is a small correction to be made regarding the source of tonight's festivities." Brad rushed forward, pushing people out of his way. His face was red, now flushed with panic and rage. He waved his arms frantically at the security guards standing near the bar. "Get him out of here," he screamed. "He is having an episode. He is dangerous. Security! Remove him immediately." Two large men in black suits stepped forward. They were hired muscle accustomed to throwing out drunks and paparazzi. They moved toward me with professional menace. I did not flinch. I did not back down. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The movement made the guards tense, reaching for their own belts, but I did not pull out a gun. I pulled out a single piece of paper. It was crumpled slightly from the rain and the garbage truck, but the seal of the bank was still visible. I held the paper up high, letting the stage lights catch it. "One more step and you will be unemployed," I warned the guards. My voice was not loud, but it had the authority of a man who had signed paychecks for thousands of workers. The guards hesitated. They looked at Brad, then back at me. They were confused. They saw a crazy old man, but they heard a CEO. "This man is trespassing," Brad yelled, desperation creeping into his tone. "He is senile. He escaped from a mental facility. Drag him out." I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "I may have escaped a facility, Brad," I said into the microphone, ensuring every person in the room heard me. "But I did not escape without a souvenir. You see, everyone, this piece of paper I am holding is not a speech. It is a transfer of debt." I looked at the crowd, making eye contact with the socialites and the businessmen. "You are all drinking champagne paid for by the sale of my property," I continued. "A sale that was fraudulent. A sale that involved the theft of assets from a trust fund. But my son-in-law here didn't just steal from me. He borrowed money. A lot of money. He borrowed against the value of the estate to throw this party and to fund his offshore accounts." Brad lunged for the stage. Shut up, old man, shut up. I turned to face him directly. The guards were closing in now, just a few feet away. The entity that holds that debt is Vanguard Corporation, I said, dropping the name like a bomb. And as of 30 minutes ago, Vanguard sold that debt to me. I bought it, Brad. I bought your loans. I bought your liabilities. I own the mortgage on your condo. I own the lease on your car. And I own the bill for this entire party. I turned back to the security guards, who were now within arm's reach. So, gentlemen, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, you can listen to the man who is technically bankrupt and about to be arrested for federal fraud. Or you can listen to me. I held the paper out towards the biggest guard. Who dares touch the biggest creditor of this party? I asked. The guard stopped. He looked at the paper, then at Brad, who was sweating profusely and looking like a trapped animal. The guard took a step back, lowering his hands. I am sorry, Mr. Sterling, the guard said, his voice flat. We don't interfere in civil disputes. Brad screamed a sound of pure, impotent fury. But before he could move, before he could run, the doors at the back of the room burst open again. This time it wasn't an old man who walked in. It was a team of 6 men in dark tactical suits. They didn't look like police. They looked like soldiers. And on the chest of their vests was a small, discreet logo. A V. Vanguard had arrived. I lowered the microphone. The room was deathly silent. Tiffany was sobbing quietly by the ice sculpture. Brad was staring at the men in the doorway, his legs shaking. I looked at my watch. 20 minutes exactly. Punctuality is a virtue, I thought. I looked down at Brad from the stage. Run, I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. Run, little rabbit. The wolves are here. Brad wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, a gesture that smeared his expensive bronzer and made him look even more manic. He looked at the security guards who had backed down, and then he looked at the crowd of silent onlookers. He realized he was losing the room. He realized the illusion of the benevolent billionaire was crumbling. So he did what cornered rats always do. He attacked. He stepped forward, his face twisting into a sneer that showed his teeth. You are bluffing, Harrison. You are just a bitter old man trying to ruin my night. It does not matter what paper you have in your hand. It does not matter what you say. The deal is done. The ink is dry, the money is already in the accounts, and half of it is already spent. You cannot unring a bell, and you cannot unsell a house. He laughed, a jagged sound that bordered on hysteria. We sold 88 Ocean Drive, he shouted, gesturing to Tiffany, who was still trembling by the ice sculpture. We sold it fair and square. We have the power of attorney. We have the deed. So take your little debt transfer and get out of here before I sue you for harassment. You have nothing. You are a ghost. I stood there on the stage looking down at him. I felt a strange sense of pity. Not for him, but for the sheer depth of his stupidity. He really thought he had won. He really thought the game was about who signed the paper first. He did not understand that the game was about what was written on the paper. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My hand was steady as a rock. You are right, Brad, I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. You did sell 88 Ocean Drive. I have seen the contract. It is a valid sale. Tiffany looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Brad straightened his spine, thinking I was conceding, but I continued, letting the word hang in the air for a second. You seem to have forgotten a small detail about family history, a detail that perhaps Tiffany was too busy shopping to remember, and you were too busy gambling to research. I walked to the edge of the stage, sitting down on a monitor speaker, so I could look Brad directly in the eye. In 1995, when Catherine and I bought the estate on Martha's Vineyard, it was a single parcel of land, 6 acres of prime coastline. But in '98, when we decided to build the guest house for visitors, I made a legal change. I subdivided the land, Brad. I split it into 2 distinct properties. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the sculpture. The main house, the mansion with the 10 bedrooms and the private beach access, I explained, speaking slowly, so he wouldn't miss a word. That property was redesignated as 88A Ocean Drive, and I placed that specific parcel into the Catherine Caldwell Irrevocable Trust, a trust that requires the signature of 3 independent trustees to sell. You do not have those signatures, Brad. You never did. Brad's mouth opened slightly. His eyes darted left and right, trying to process what I was saying. So what did you sell? I asked, mocking his confusion. You sold 88 Ocean Drive. That is the legal address of the guest house. You know the one. The 2-bedroom cottage near the road. The one we used to store the kayaks and the lawn equipment. The one that used to be a garage before we renovated it. I stood up and pointed at Tiffany. You sold a glorified shed to Vanguard Corporation for $4.5 million. A gasp went through the room. People began to whisper, looking at each other with wide eyes. The absurdity of it was sinking in. I looked at Tiffany. She was staring at me in horror. You thought you were selling the palace princess? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. But you sold the gatehouse. Do you know what the market value of that cottage is? It is maybe $600,000 on a good day, but you charged Vanguard $4 million more than it is worth. Tiffany dropped her face into her hands. She understood money. She understood that she had just made the worst deal in real estate history, but she did not yet understand the danger. Brad shook his head violently. No, that is a lie. The deed said the whole estate. The survey said 6 acres. The survey you used was from 1994, I snapped. It was outdated. You were so eager to get the cash you didn't even order a new title search. You committed fraud, Brad. And not just regular fraud. You committed fraud against Vanguard Corporation. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage. You sold them a lie. You took their money and promised them a mansion and land to build high-rises. But all they own is a shack and a 1/4 acre of sand. They cannot build on it. They cannot develop it. And the main house, the one they actually wanted, is sitting right next door, untouchable, safe inside a trust you cannot break. I let out a short, harsh laugh. You didn't just rip them off, Brad. You humiliated them. Do you think a company like Vanguard takes that lightly? Do you think they just ask for a refund? Brad was pale now. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine and had already lifted his foot. They will sue me, he stammered. They will just sue me. I will declare bankruptcy. I shook my head slowly. If it were a bank, maybe, I said. If it were a nice, polite investment firm, maybe. But this is Vanguard. They don't file lawsuits, Brad. They file missing persons reports. I turned to the crowd addressing the room at large. This man stands before you claiming to be a tycoon. But in reality, he is a con artist who just swindled one of the most dangerous organizations in the world. He is not a king. He is a dead man walking. Tiffany let out a wail, a sound of pure despair. She ran toward Brad, grabbing his lapels. You told me it was safe, she screamed, shaking him. You told me you checked everything. You told me we were rich. I sold my mother's house for nothing. Brad pushed her away roughly. Get off me, you stupid woman. It is your father's fault. He set us up. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You planned this. You knew we would find the old deed. You let us do it. I did not deny it. I just looked at him with the cold eyes of a judge delivering a sentence. I gave you enough rope, Brad, I said softly. I just didn't think you would hang yourself so quickly. The tension in the room was suffocating. The party guests were backing away, creating a wide circle around Brad and Tiffany, as if their misfortune was contagious. They knew that the party was over. They knew that something terrible was about to happen. Brad looked around wildly. He looked at the exits. He looked at the guards who were now staring at him with open contempt. "I am leaving," he announced, trying to button his jacket with trembling fingers. "I am going to the airport. I will fix this from there." He took a step towards the door. "I wouldn't go out there if I were you," I said into the microphone. He stopped, turning back to look at me. "Why?" "Because I invited a guest," I said. "A representative from the buyer. I thought since you took their money so happily, you should at least meet the man who authorized the transfer." I nodded toward the double doors at the back of the room. Right on cue, the doors swung open. They did not open quickly or violently. They opened with a slow, deliberate weight. A man stepped into the room. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a dark gray suit that fit him like a second skin. He was not tall, but he radiated a density, a heaviness that made the air in the room feel thinner. His hair was cut short, military style, and running down the left side of his face from his eye to his jaw was a jagged, pale scar. Brad froze. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of a table to stay upright. I watched Brad's face, and I knew that he knew. He recognized the man. In the underworld of gambling and high-stakes loans, there are faces you pray you never see. This was one of them. This was Mr. Silas Kincaid. He was not a lawyer for Vanguard. He was the head of their loss prevention department. But in his line of work, loss prevention didn't mean installing cameras. It meant removing problems. Mr. Kincaid walked into the room followed by 4 silent men. The crowd parted for him, instantly terrified by the sheer menace he projected. He did not look at me. He did not look at Tiffany. He walked straight toward Brad, his eyes locked on his target like a laser. Brad made a small, whimpering sound. He looked at me, his eyes begging for mercy. He looked at the man who he had called senile, the man he had thrown in a garbage truck, and for the first time I saw true understanding in his eyes. He realized that I was the only thing standing between him and the monster approaching him. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible across the silent room. "Dad, please." I lowered the microphone. I folded the debt transfer paper and put it back in my pocket. I looked at Brad, and then I looked at Mr. Kincaid, who was now only 10 feet away. I did not say a word. I just stepped back into the shadows of the stage and let the wolves meet. Mr. Kincaid stood like a statue of judgment in the center of the room, his presence alone lowering the temperature by 10 degrees. Brad was hyperventilating, his eyes darting between the scar on Kincaid's face and the exit doors that were blocked by Vanguard soldiers. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the floor to drop. But I was not done with him yet. I did not want him to just disappear into the dark trunk of a Vanguard car. I wanted to strip him bare before the world. I wanted to take the last thing he had left, which was his lie. I stepped back to the microphone. The feedback squealed slightly, a sharp sound that snapped the audience's attention back to me. "Before you leave with your new friends, Brad," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "there is one final asset we need to discuss. You see, when my team was auditing your offshore accounts, to track the stolen funds, we found some very interesting recurring payments." Brad shook his head, pleading with his eyes. "No, Harrison, do not. Please." I ignored him. I pulled a small remote control from my pocket. I had prepared this presentation with Benedict in the car, and now it was time for the premiere. I pointed the remote at the massive projection screen behind the stage, the one that had been displaying a loop of Tiffany and Brad's wedding photos all night. I pressed the button. The wedding photos vanished. In their place, a high-definition photograph appeared. It was taken from a long lens, but the clarity was undeniable. It showed Brad sitting at a cafe in Paris. He was not alone. He was holding hands with the blonde woman I had seen on the yacht. They were laughing. But it was the next photo that sucked the air out of the room. I clicked the button again. The new image showed Brad holding a toddler, a little boy with curly hair who looked exactly like him. They were standing in front of a preschool in Switzerland. The caption on the screen, which Benedict had helpfully added, read, "Leo Sterling, tuition payment, receipt, $50,000. The silence in the sapphire room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb detonates, but before the building collapses. I looked at Tiffany. She was frozen. Her face was a mask of confusion that was slowly cracking into horror. She looked at the screen, then at Brad, then back at the screen. She was trying to process the impossible. Her husband, the man she had betrayed her father for, had a secret life. He had a son. "I have one more," I said softly into the microphone. I clicked the remote a final time. This photo was a close-up. It was the blonde woman's neck. Resting against her skin was a diamond necklace, a vintage piece with a distinct platinum setting in the shape of a cascading waterfall. Tiffany let out a sound that was not human. It was a keen of pure agony. She recognized that necklace instantly. It was the one Catherine had worn on her deathbed. It was the necklace Tiffany had begged for, and I had refused to give her because I wanted to keep it safe. Brad had drilled into my safe, stolen it, and draped it around the neck of his mistress. "That is Mom's necklace," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. "You gave her Mom's necklace." Brad held up his hands, backing away. "Tiffany, listen, it is not what it looks like. I was just holding it for safekeeping. I was going to give it to you for your birthday." "Liar!" she screamed. The explosion happened in a split second. Tiffany launched herself at him. She did not attack like a socialite concerned with her appearance. She attacked like a wounded animal. Her manicured nails raked across his face, drawing blood instantly. She grabbed his hair, screaming words that were incoherent mixtures of rage and grief. "You stole everything," she shrieked, slapping him repeatedly. "You made me steal from my dad. You made me sell the house. And you have a kid. You have a secret kid while I spent thousands on treatments." Brad stumbled back, trying to shield his face. "Get off me, you crazy witch!" He shoved her. He shoved her hard. Tiffany flew backward, crashing into the table holding the champagne tower. Hundreds of glasses shattered, sending shards of crystal and expensive wine everywhere. She lay there in the wreckage, gasping for air, blood trickling from a cut on her arm. Brad stood over her, panting, his mask completely gone. "Yeah, I have a kid," he spat, wiping blood from his cheek. "I have a kid with a woman who does not whine every time she breaks a nail. You were just a bank account, Tiffany. You were a useful idiot. I tolerated you because your old man was rich. But now he is broke and you are nothing." He turned to run, but he forgot who was standing behind him. "Mr. Kincaid stepped forward and placed a single heavy hand on Brad's shoulder. Brad stopped, instantly paralyzed by the grip. "I believe Mr. Caldwell has the floor," Kincaid said, his voice like grinding gravel. I walked down the stairs from the stage. I stepped over the broken glass and the spilled wine. I walked past Tiffany, who was weeping on the floor, and stood directly in front of Brad. "You are wrong about one thing, Brad," I said quietly. "I am not broke." I held up the debt transfer paper again. "I told you I bought the debt from Vanguard. That means I own the $4.5 million you stole. I own the interest. I own the penalties. And since you committed fraud to get it, the law says I can seize your personal assets to recover my loss." I leaned in close so only he could hear the venom in my voice. "Mr. Kincaid here works for me now regarding this specific transaction. I have a choice, Brad. I can let him take you. I can let him put you in a car and drive you to a place where debt collectors do not use calculators, they use pliers. Or I can offer you an alternative." Brad looked at Kincaid, then at me. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the blood from Tiffany's scratches. "Please, Harrison," he sobbed. "Please don't let him take me. I will do anything. Anything I asked. Yes, anything." "Good." I turned toward the main doors. Benedict was standing there, checking his watch. He nodded once. "I made a call before I came up here," I said, stepping back from Brad. You see, while I enjoy the idea of owning you, I believe in the rule of law. And as much as I hate you, I am not a murderer. So I am not going to let Vanguard take you. Brad slumped in relief. Thank you. Oh God, thank you, Harrison. Do not thank me yet, I said, coldness returning to my voice. The double doors burst open for the third time that night. But this time it wasn't a private army. It was a swarm of blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. FBI. Economic Crimes Unit. Agents swarmed the room, moving with precision. They had their weapons drawn but lowered. They headed straight for us. Bradley Sterling, an agent shouted, holding up a badge. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and international racketeering. We have the logs from your Cayman accounts. Brad looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You called the feds. I saved your life, I said, shrugging. Kincaid would have killed you. The federal government will only keep you in a cage for 20 years. You should be grateful. The agents grabbed him, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs tightening around his wrists. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Better than any symphony. They dragged him away. He was screaming my name, begging me to call the lawyers, but I just turned my back, Mr. Wong. Kincaid nodded to me, a sign of professional respect, and signaled his team to leave. They faded away as quickly as they had arrived, leaving only the police and the wreckage of the party. I looked down. Tiffany was still on the floor, sitting amidst the broken glass and spilled champagne. Her silver dress was ruined. Her hair was a mess. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked small. She looked like the child who used to wait for me to come home from work. But I saw the ring on her finger. I saw the greed that had led her here. Daddy, she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. Daddy, please. He tricked me. I didn't know. Help me. I looked at her hand. I did not take it. The debt is in both your names, Tiffany, I said, my voice breaking slightly, but remaining firm. You signed the papers. You spent the money. Brad is going to prison, but someone has to pay me back. I crouched down so I was eye level with her. You have a choice. You can go with the agents. They are waiting for you in the lobby. Or you can sign over everything you have left. The jewelry, the clothes, the car, and you can work. You can work every day for the rest of your life to pay back the $4 million you stole from me. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. She curled into a ball at my feet, kneeling in the shards of her own ambition. I stood up and straightened my tie. The room was empty of guests now. It was just me, my lawyer, and my broken family. I had won. But as I looked at my daughter kneeling before me, I realized that victory tasted a lot like ashes. Benedict walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It is done, Harrison. Yes, I said, looking at the door where they had dragged Brad out. It is done. Now get the car. I want to go home. I walked away, leaving her there on her knees. I did not look back. The lesson was over. Now the long payment plan began. The silence that followed the chaos was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The sapphire room was empty now, save for the cleaning crew, sweeping up the shards of crystal that glittered like diamonds on the floor. The police had taken Brad away, and the Vanguard soldiers had vanished into the night, leaving me alone with my lawyer and my daughter. Tiffany sat on a velvet chair near the service entrance. She had stopped crying. Now she just stared at the floor, her mascara-stained face pale and hollow. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together poorly. Benedict placed a single document on the table in front of her. It was not a lawsuit. It was a termination of our contract as father and daughter. I sat down opposite her. I did not want to look at her, but I forced myself to. I needed to remember this moment. I needed to remember that the little girl in pigtails was gone, replaced by the woman who had signed my life away for a handbag. Tiffany looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Is Brad going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her with disbelief. After everything he did, after the other woman and the secret child, she still asked about him. That was the tragedy of Tiffany. She was addicted to the people who hurt her. "Brad is going to federal prison," I said, my voice flat. "He will be there for at least 15 years. You will be 50 years old when he gets out. But we are not here to talk about him. We are here to talk about you." Tiffany flinched. "Am I going to jail too, Dad? Please do not let them take me." I leaned back in my chair. "The FBI agents wanted to take you." I lied. "They saw your signature on the wire transfers. They saw your name on the shell companies. Technically, you are a co-conspirator. You could be sharing a cell with Brad by morning." She began to shake again, tears spilling over. "I will do anything, Dad. I am sorry. I swear I am sorry." "I believe you are sorry you got caught," I said. "But I am not going to send you to prison. You are my blood, and despite everything, I cannot watch you rot in a cage. But you are not going back to your condo either." I tapped the document on the table. "This is a waiver," I explained. "It states that you voluntarily relinquish all claims to the Caldwell estate, current and future. You get nothing. No trust fund. No inheritance when I die. No monthly allowance. You are walking away from this table with the clothes on your back and not a penny more." She looked at the paper, then at me. "But how will I live? I have a mortgage. I have bills. I am paying off the mortgage on the condo," I said. "And then I am selling it to recoup my losses. You have 24 hours to move out. As for how you will live, I have arranged a job for you." "A job?" she asked, blinking. "Yes. My old construction firm needs a receptionist at the front desk. It pays minimum wage. It is honest work. You will answer phones. You will file papers, and you will learn the value of $1 for the first time in your life. You will rent a small apartment, you will take the subway, and you will support yourself." She looked horrified. "Receptionist? But Dad, I cannot live on minimum wage." "Then you can go to prison," I said, standing up. "Those are your choices, Tiffany. The work boots or the handcuffs. Decide now." She looked at Benedict, hoping for a softening, but my lawyer just held out a pen. She took it. Her hand trembled as she signed her name. This time she did not look for a loop in the letters. She just signed away her golden parachute. I watched her leave the hotel. She walked out into the cold Boston night, shivering in her ruined silver dress. She looked small and fragile, and for a second I wanted to call her back. I wanted to fix it like I always did. But I stayed where I was. I had fixed her problems her whole life, and look where it got us. It was time for her to fix herself. The drive to Martha's Vineyard the next day was long and quiet. Benedict offered to come, but I told him I needed to do this alone. I drove my old truck, the one I used to visit job sites in. I left the Bentley in the garage. I didn't want to drive a trophy. I wanted to feel the road. I crossed the bridge onto the island as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. I drove down Ocean Drive past the small guest house that Brad had sold to Vanguard. It sat there dark and empty, a monument to their greed. I kept driving until I reached the end of the lane where the pavement turned to crushed white shells. The gates to 88A were rusted shut. I had to get out and push them open, the metal groaning in protest. I drove up the winding path lined with hydrangeas that Catherine had planted. They were overgrown, wild and untamed, but they were still blooming. And then I saw it. The main house. It stood on the bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a sprawling shingle-style mansion with a wraparound porch. It was exactly as I had left it 5 years ago. The windows were dark, the paint was peeling in places, but it was still standing. It was strong. It was built to last, just like me. I parked the truck and walked up the steps. I unlocked the front door with the key I had kept on my chain every single day. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and lavender and memories. I walked through the foyer, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I went into the great room where the furniture was still covered in white sheets, looking like ghosts, waiting for a party that never happened. I walked out onto the back deck. The ocean roared below the waves, crashing against the rocks with a rhythm that had been beating since the beginning of time. I sat down in the old teak rocking chair. It creaked under my weight. I poured myself a glass of red wine from a bottle I had brought with me. It was a 1995 vintage, the year we bought this land. I held the glass up to the dying light. I had won. I had defeated the daughter who betrayed me. I had crushed the son-in-law who tried to kill me. I had reclaimed my fortune and my property. I was rich. I was free. I was victorious. But as I sat there listening to the wind, I looked at the empty chair beside me. That was Catherine's chair. I remembered how she used to sit there wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. I remembered how she used to tell me that money was just paper, but time was gold. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted sour. I realized then that victory is a cold companion. I had my house, but it was just wood and stone. I had my money, but it could not buy the one thing I desperately wanted. It could not buy trust. It could not buy a family that loved me for who I was, not what I had. I closed my eyes and let the sea spray hit my face. I was the king of Ocean Drive. I was the old fox who outsmarted the wolves. But sitting there in the dark with only the sound of the waves for company, I felt less like a king and more like a survivor of a shipwreck clinging to a raft of gold in the middle of a lonely ocean. I raised my glass to the empty chair. To us, Catherine, I whispered into the wind. I saved the house. I just wish I could have saved the family. I sat there until the bottle was empty and the stars came out. I was safe. I was wealthy. And I was completely and utterly alone. I kept my assets, but I lost my home because a home is people, not bricks. I wonder sometimes if I was too hard on her. I wonder if I should have let it go, but then I remember the garbage truck. I remember the look in her eyes when she signed the papers. What do you think, friends? I kept my dignity and my fortune, but I lost my only child. In this modern world, where we chase success so hard, do you believe that money can ever buy true loyalty, or is filial piety a currency that is gone forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because honestly, tonight I really need to hear them. This story serves as a brutal reminder that the people closest to us are often the ones capable of inflicting the deepest wounds. We spend our lives building fortresses of wealth, thinking they will protect us, but we often forget to guard the gates of our own hearts. Harrison's journey teaches us that boundaries are not just about keeping enemies out. They are about defining how we allow ourselves to be treated by those we love. Survival sometimes requires us to cut off the very limbs that are poisoning us, even if those limbs are our own flesh and blood. True peace is not found in a bank account, but in the self-respect that comes from standing up for your own existence. If this story moved you or made you think about your own boundaries, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more of these powerful real-life stories to light. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it is okay to choose yourself. See you in the next video.